This year was probably one of the best goldenrod years I have seen in my entire life as a beekeeper. This entire field was goldenrod, which have now gone to seed. So that means that winter is knocking on our door, guys. I do have a few asters that are popping up too. This is the last nectar and pollen source that the bees get before winter really hits. They do provide a decent amount of nectar for them, so if there's anything that's lacking in the hive or they just need a little bit of an extra boost, it really helps them out. So I had this entire video planned out and filmed, and I came home, went to start editing it, and realized that for some reason it did not record any of the audio. Now, when I film videos, I usually just start the camera and start going off of that. I do not do scripts or anything like that. So for me to just redo this whole entire video, I figured, hey, we'll just chat here, you and I, and make the most of it with what we have. So it is October 7th, and one would say that this is the most crucial time of the year to be a beekeeper. Come on, Emily. For the last 2 months, we have been putting on mite treatments and feeding our lighter hives to get them up to weight before the temps start to drop below 55 degrees. Once it hits around 55, the bees can't really take down any sort of syrup. And on top of that, once it gets to this time of year, it would take way too much time and lots of energy for them to start dehydrating that syrup once they store it in the honeycomb. I learned this a couple years ago that if you feed too late, you're just going to end up creating a moist hive environment, and it doesn't usually end well. Actually, it never ends well. So for all of September, I have been feeding these hives, so they should be up to weight now. So we're going to go around today and take a peek at what the hives are looking at in this yard. This is the hunting yard. You guys have heard me talk about it many times, mostly me complaining about how this yard just did not get much nectar coming in at all year. I don't know if it's just the plants around. We did see this fall that almost 80% of the plants in this area are goldenrod, so, you know, it would make sense why they were starving all year. There's not much plant diversity in the area. That is important. So we're going to give this yard another year. I've noticed that whenever we move bees into an area, the flows usually just keep getting better and better every single year. Now that is if the weather actually cooperates. This was an unusual year. But usually the bees, they kind of like cultivate the plants and the flowers in the area. When they pollinate all these flowers, then it just sends a signal back to them, back to the plant, that, hey, we can produce more flowers next year because we have a lot of pollinators coming to spread our seeds and spread our pollen. So hopefully that happens in this yard and the flows start to get better because, yeah, this yard was pretty expensive this year. But anyways, all right, so I'm going through these hives, and what I'm looking for is where they're at with their timing, how much honey stores they have, how much brood do they have. I'm just kind of getting a general just look of what these hives are looking like and if they're ready for winter. Now, these hives have bees on every single frame in top and bottom box. So that is something you really want to see this time of year. That means that they've been successful the last couple months making winter bees and producing more of their workforce to start preparing for winter. Now, keep in mind that your brood nest is going to shrink, and they are going to start shrinking the number of bees they have. But also remember that the bees, winter bees, can live up to 6 months if they have to. So that kind of explains what I'm seeing with some of these hives, which I'll talk about after we look into the next hive, because it kind of gave me a light bulb moment in the timing and understanding bees. That is the biggest thing I've learned this year, is truly kind of understanding what it is to be a bee and how they time things according to the environment. And learning these things has allowed me to be a little bit more hands-off with my hives. In all honesty, sometimes I think we kind of overmanage our colonies, but I think that's something that's really important in the beginning years as you learn your bees, because the only way to learn is for your head to always just be in a hive, watching how they react from week to week when the season changes based off of the weather and the different nectar and pollen sources in the area. So it has been a really neat learning experience the last 5 years, and I can't wait to keep learning even more. But Anyways, back on topic. I always get off on these tangents. But I remember when I first started beekeeping, this was a time of year that I would begin to panic. So, for all of you new beekeepers, you're probably going into your hives right now and realizing that they are looking smaller, and you're beginning to wonder, oh my gosh, is my hive even going to be big enough to make it through the winter time? You see all these videos on YouTube of their hives that have bees in top and bottom box, like the ones that I have here, and you start to freak out a little bit because your hives don't look like the YouTube hives. Well, let me assure you that the bees know what they're doing. And that's why I say that I've kind of adapted a more hands-off approach now, because the more we get in the bees' way, the more they're going to have to plan and the harder they're going to have to work. You want to be able to work with your bees, not against your bees. You want to be able to maybe be a couple steps ahead of them just to aid them and assist them, not to force them to completely change plans all the time. That is where your hives start to struggle. So if you treated your hives for mites, and you also know that they have around 80 pounds of feed on them, 80 pounds of honey, and what that really looks like is just having that top box full of honey. That is generally what I recommend to new beekeepers. Is don't try out overwintering singles, don't try out overwintering nukes, or maybe a hive with just a medium on top. Try it with a double deep, just so you start to learn how to overwinter your hives. Then once you learn that, then start trying all the other cool fancy stuff to do. But the bees are pretty resilient. So I've seen hives that really I was not thinking they were going to make it throughout the winter time actually end up making it. So if that gives you a little bit of confidence, please take it. This is all a learning process when it comes to bees, and if they don't end up making it, you still have all that comb. That's going to be super easy for you to just plug bees into and start all over again. Well, technically you're not starting all over again because you have all that comb. But, so, okay. What I wanted to chat about with these two colonies is the colony I was first in, that one that's on the left. It ended up requeening itself in I think it was like early to mid-August. Was definitely not something that was intentional. I was noticing that their queen was beginning to fail, and I was going to put a new queen in there, but then just life ended up getting a hold of me, and I ended up not being able to get a queen in there. Well, they made their own, and none of the queens in this yard have actually mated successfully. They always come back with something bitten out of their side, or just not come back at all, or missing wings. I think there's maybe some dragonflies or birds, just some sort of queen predator in the area that is causing this to happen. But they ended up mating and she came back. So that is huge, just that they actually ended up having a queen come back. I wonder too if, just since there's never been any bees in this area, there's probably not a large drone congregation area too, so maybe that's a contributing factor. It could almost just be like a desert for the bees here. But we'll learn more over the next couple seasons. But anyways, so she came back mated, and I was a little nervous because that's really late for the bees to be coming back. Especially when they had to start putting on food stores, and that's when I was already feeding. So by the time she started laying her first brood cycle, she was plowing through food just because she didn't have all of those baby bees that she was making. They ended up having like that month off of no brood. So they had to rebuild that up again. Well, so far, judging by how many bees you saw were in their hive, they are doing well, but she has around 8 frames of capped brood right now. So since she was the first hive I started with, I was kind of using her to judge the other ones, but as I kept continuing on through this yard, I noticed that all of the other hives had maybe 1 or 2 frames of capped brood and only 1 frame of eggs. Now, this was a little bit alarming because I thought, okay, why aren't they producing winter bees right now? Why isn't the queen laying very much? We haven't had that many cold nights yet, and that's usually when the queen starts to shut down. But the bees know what is coming sooner than we do. So I wonder if there's going to be a nasty winter this year. I guess we'll see. But when I started going through all the colonies, I realized that this actually must have been the standard. The only reason that that first hive had so many frames of brood is because they were behind when it comes to their winter bee production, which I wouldn't say that's necessarily a great thing just because they are a little bit lighter than these other colonies because they've been blowing through food faster since they have more brood than the rest of them. So they have more mouths, more baby mouths to feed that require more food. But the rest of these hives have a good amount of bees. Like, look at how many bees are on that frame that I'm pulling out. That was one of my brood slash larva frames that I found in this hive. And remember, like I said, winter bees can live up to 6 months. So if they already have this many bees in the hive, they're going to have a nice looking cluster. So I'm curious, what do your guys' hives look like right now? Do you have only a couple frames of brood, or do you have maybe 8 or 10 frames of brood? It's cool to see the differences between the different areas too, and how the bees are in your area, maybe somewhere down south versus in a more northern climate like I am up here in Michigan. But this hive does have this entire top box full of stores, and it even has 4 frames in the bottom just caked full of honey. So I would say they have more than enough food to last them the winter time. Okay, so what do you do if your hive is too small? How do you know if it's too small? So if I was to go into a hive and I saw that there was only like 4 frames of bees, you want to combine that hive. It's not going to be strong enough to make it through the winter on their own. And what I would usually do is I would pick 2 equal sized hives, like maybe 2 weak hives or 1 weak hive and a medium hive, and those would be the ones I combine. I would never combine a weak hive onto a strong hive, and the reason I say that is you're going to screw up the timing in terms of how much food stores they had planned for their winter time. That is how they base how big of a cluster they're going to have, is all through August and September they're looking, okay, how much honey do we have in here right now? They also know how strong a flow is. Like I keep saying, the bees always somehow know when a good flow is coming. In this yard in particular, just all of a sudden in July, they started pumping out so much brood before any of my other hives started pumping out brood. And I was at that point going to combine them. I had originally gone into this yard to combine them in July, but once I saw they were making all this brood, I instantly realized, hey, they're planning for something right now. They know something that's coming that I don't know. They knew that the goldenrod flow was going to be good this year. Now, how do they know this? I have no idea, but I can see it in their planning is what I'm getting at. So back to what I was saying, if you were to put more bees into a strong hive that had already planned out their winter stores for the year, you're going to put them in a situation where they're not going to have enough honey to feed all of the bees in that hive. Now, you can put on sugar. That's normally what we do. We've done that in the years past, but this is the first year that we're trying not to do that. That's why we fed syrup, and we're going to see what ends up happening and how our hives do. Mostly because I don't want to have to crack open my hive and check food stores in the winter time, because they're going to end up getting a lot of water running in, especially with these migratory lids, and I don't want to break that propolis seal. Unless I had a telescoping cover, then you can get away with cracking it. It's not going to make a difference. No water's going to seep in because you have that barrier that's hanging over the sides of your hive. So something that I am interested in trying this winter is using a heat, like a thermal gun, to see where my cluster is in the hive. That's how I'm going to be able to tell if I need to crack them open to add emergency feed or not. So if you guys have any recommendations on a good thermal gun, please send them my way. I'm going to be looking for one soon. I think this is going to make things a little bit easier so that I'm just not, just cracking open a hive blindly, not really knowing what I'm going to see. So this foam is the very last step to getting these hives ready for wintertime. This is what I'm using to help prevent any moisture from building up underneath the lid. This is just regular 1-inch insulation foam. We ended up buying it from Lowe's. We went to Home Depot because it was technically cheaper there, but they had all of their sheets already pre-cut, and they already had half cuts through the insulation foam. I don't know if that makes sense. There's probably a technical term for it, but I'm not the builder here. That is all Casey. But anyways, so we ended up getting some of these sheets and cutting them to use underneath our hives. And the reason that I like them is because they don't hold moisture inside the hive, and they're super simple. And honestly, they're a lot cheaper than having to get a quilt box and putting quilt in there as well. Now, I usually do put an upper entrance in a lot of these, but I haven't the last couple years. And also, I've noticed that sometimes the bees will make an upper entrance themselves. So that is partially why I am putting them on now. Because remember, like I keep saying, the bees are constantly planning. So you want to be ahead of them. You don't want to be behind in their planning, or you're going to throw them completely off. So I'm getting this foam on early. So one, if they want to make an upper entrance in it, they can and they will. And also so they can start propolizing it down. I really have nothing else to be doing in these hives the rest of the year. They all have lots of food. They're jam-packed with food. And they have a decent size cluster, just judging by how many bees are in the top and bottom box. They are also treated for mites, and even if I didn't treat them for mites, this is not the time of year you really want to be treating them. It is actually very late. Mostly because when it comes to treating for mites, at some point they hold the hive back. They either stop the queen from laying eggs, they burn brood, or they do something in the hive that sets off their timing. Now, this is okay because, I guess it's okay. You kind of have to put up with it, I guess, since we do have varroa mites. But when it comes to this time of year, that is detrimental to your colony. So you don't want to be doing something that's going to stress them out. So that is mostly why I treat in August. Also because you want these winter bees to be healthy. So if they've been parasitized the last 2 months, I don't know. You just cross your fingers and pray that everything goes well. That is one of the biggest things whenever I have talked to beekeepers that say that they lose their hives every single year is I ask them, well, did you treat for mites? Yes. Okay, but you have to go deeper on that question. Okay, when did you treat for mites? What month? What did you use? How long did you use it? All of those details are very important because one of the other things I learned this year, since we are getting back into treating for mites, is that you have to time your treatments with the bees too. I think if you guys wanted to play a drinking game, it would be every single time I say timing, take a drink, and you would probably be drunk by now because all I've said this year is timing, 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 timing. That was the theme to everything I've learned with the bees this year. That is the most important thing. So if you time your treatments with the flows of the bees in how they're expanding or shrinking their brood nests, where the flows are, all of that, then you will have really good, healthy looking bees. And that's exactly what I tried to do this year. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about for something that you should be aware of is it is now robbing season, especially for those warmer days. But I have not really noticed any robbing in these hives this year, and there's a reason for that. So my planning with this year was to have everything, like I keep saying, on the same timing. But my reason for that is since I did feed them all at the same time, they should in theory all look about the same. They should have the same amount of bees, the same amount of food. Then there shouldn't be a whole lot of robbing going on because they are all of the same strength. There's not a weak link in this yard that they're going to be able to decimate and rob out and start that robbing behavior. So if they even try robbing a hive, the force of bees is going to be so strong that they're not going to stand a chance. And so far, I've seen that works. That is the best way of preventing robbing, I will say, is making sure all of your hives are on the exact same page. Now, they aren't robbing each other, but when I did leave today, they did try robbing my car. They must smell some of the syrup that I had in my car over the last month. Oh my gosh, everything becomes so sticky when you're feeding. You try so hard not to get it on you, but you do. It gets everywhere. So I think they were trying to rob out the syrup and maybe even just some honeycomb that I had in a bucket in the back of my car because I drove home with about 100 bees in my car, but that's just the life of the beekeeper. But we are going to start putting screens on these bottom boards. That is actually the very last thing I have to do to these hives before I can forget about being a beekeeper for a couple months. I hate saying that because I already wish it was springtime. I already miss working the bees as hard as we usually do in the springtime. I don't know. I'm a little crazy. But we are going to put down a like mesh wire screen, but one that has big enough holes that the bees can still get through it. So that way we can keep out any potential mice or rodents from getting in our hives. That was a huge problem last year. We had hives that had holes in the sides of them. They had holes in their frames through the plastic, through the wooden bar on top. Those mice can devastate a hive. And they say, well, if your hive is strong, then mice aren't really a big issue. But I beg to differ with that. And the reason for that is say you have a cluster that is all nice and happy. They are hanging out and maybe right in that space between the top and bottom box, or maybe even the top box. And you have a mouse come in and maybe it's really cold that the bees can't break cluster. Well, that mouse is going to be able to live there and do its thing and start establishing itself because the bees are too cold to be able to go down there to move it. And what will happen is that mouse will start eating their stores and start moving closer and closer to the cluster. This will cause so much stress for those bees that they will start using more energy because they keep getting shook and awake. They don't hibernate, but they do go into a, I don't know if you want to call it like a meditative state, where they just all vibrate their bodies and they try to conserve as much energy as possible. But if you have an intruder in the hive starting to take over their colony, you could collapse a hive even if it was strong just because a mouse came in. So to prevent that, we're putting down those screens this year. We're also going to put some screens on the bottom holes of these hives because there is a drainage hole in the back corner to prevent any water when the snow starts to fall and starts melting from collecting on the bottom board. That is something else you want to think about for your hives this winter time, is if you don't have a hole in the bottom board in the back of it, then you want to make sure your hive is at least tilted forward a little bit so that that water will run right out across the bottom board and out of the hive. But all right, I would say today was a pretty successful day. These hives are looking strong and happy and healthy, so I'm feeling pretty confident going into winter this year. It is always so nerve-wracking just hoping and praying that your hives do end up making it through. But I did my best to plan everything out so that they would be set up for success. So I hope this video was helpful and that maybe you learned something from this video. Or even if you guys have some suggestions, feel free to throw them in the comments. I do enjoy reading them, but please try to be a little considerate of your words. There are some people, maybe they're just trolls, but there are some people that will hop on here and I don't know, they just seem like very angry human beings, and I'm sorry for that. I hope your life gets better. That's all I can say. But alright, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and I hope that your bees are looking strong, and hey, let's do this. We got this. This winter is going to be awesome. We are sending all the positive energy we possibly can out into the world because that is definitely what it needs right now, if you know what I mean. But all right, I'll see you guys in the next one. Don't quit and be fit.